Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Grant Consolidation Schedule Guidelines webinar with Annalisa Pixton. My name is Calvin Kamalu. I work here at Positive Learning, and I'm just going to be introducing the webinar, going over a few things to remember, as well as the agenda. But first and foremost, we're happy you're here, and thank you for taking the time out of your day. To begin, just wanted to go over a few things to remember, in case you had questions about this before or now. First, in case you're unable to watch the entire webinar, we will be sending out the recording afterwards along with the slides and other mentioned materials. Second, if you have any questions after the webinar, you can submit those to us in our post-webinar survey, which will be sent to your email directly after this webinar. Please don't hesitate to ask anything. The purpose of the webinar is to help you. So we're happy to answer any of your questions. And third is this webinar will be the first of a series we will be hosting throughout the application schedule. So if this doesn't cover every step in the detail you were looking for, we do plan to do so in the future. However, like I said, if you have any specific questions, the more we know about what you'd like to know about, the better. So let us know and we'll address them. Next, I want to quickly introduce the two people you'll see during this webinar. Annalisa Pixton has been in education for many years and in many different roles and titles and positions. She'll explain more about her background and how she got involved and how she knows so much about the scheduling, but she's also the Chief Academic Officer here at Positive Learning and plays a huge role in the impact that our product has on helping students learn. Now, Adam Bushman is the VP of Product Marketing here at Positive Learning, has worked in technology, education technology for a long time, and he will be the one that will be interviewing Annalise. And lastly, here is the agenda of topics we will dive into during the webinar. This webinar will probably give you more of a big picture view on the entire process, but we'll provide you with the how-tos in getting started. We'll begin by talking about submission preparation, leading to managing your submissions, and lastly, preparing for next year. So I hope you all enjoy this broadcast. We're happy you're here, and without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn the time over to Adam Bushman and Annalisa Pixton.
Thanks for that intro, Cal. How you doing, Annalisa? It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Adam. I'm great. How are you?
Oh, doing great. Thank you. I'm super excited to talk about grants today. I don't know that there's many people that I know that would be excited to talk about grants, but I know you are. I know you've got a ton of experience with this, and I know you're, I'm glad you're here to help address some of these questions. To help out some of our educators. So first of all, can you tell me, how do you know so much about grants? Why is that a thing for you?
So I was a federal title programs chair and I worked as an operations manager. Both of those positions require pretty extensive knowledge of federal grant programs. And the other thing is I just think schools should get as much money as they can for their kids. So I keep up to date on it, keep fresh on it, and really enjoy sharing that knowledge with people to help them do the same.
That's fantastic and a very admirable goal. I think we can all agree that that's an admirable goal. Well, so let's dig in and get started. So the June 30th application date is coming right up, and I know there's a lot of people that are sweating that due date. So just right off the bat, what advice would you offer to those people?
So I think most people here probably know that the eGrants portal has been updated, and if new technology makes you nervous, you're not alone, but you may be tempted to go ahead and use the exception for the paper application. But I'm going to read to you what TEA puts on their own website about that. They say TEA has a very limited resource to provide technical assistance to those who experience difficulty accessing and using these schedules, meaning the paper schedules. Any eligible entity submitting paper application is responsible for ensuring that printed schedules maintain TEA formats. And then they include a link to instructions, which are 32 pages long. And they end that note by telling you if anything's wrong in there, they're not going to accept your application. So I'm going to tell you that you just need to be brave and get into that e-portal and learn how to use it. But even if you are going to print and fill it out, you need to have a plan this year for how that's going to happen. So you need to figure out how you're going to access those documents in the portal if you are going to print and you need a checklist of like technical details and other sorts of details before you get started. Adam, this will make you smile. I think a lot of our educator friends assume that the technology people are taking care of that, you know, on the other side of the house, and then they go in to get something started and find out that the technology people didn't know what they needed. So you don't want to find out at 3:30 on June 29th that you don't have the access you need to turn the stuff in. That certainly never happened to me personally, but if it had, it would leave an indelible mark that I would never forget. So you want to have a checklist. And if you're in Texas, that checklist would include getting your new Teal logins in place. If you're here and you don't know what the new Teal login is, you need to get on that right away. The TE website will tell you how to do that, but it's replacing your old access. And under the Teal access, you need to have your new user roles defined because it's going to limit your access by what your user role is. And then you need to have compatible browsers installed. And for some of our listeners, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about, but if you don't know what that means, we'll talk in a little bit about how you can remedy that, but you've got to make sure you've got a browser that can handle the new grants portal. And then you need to have your pop-ups and firewalls enabled. So your pop-ups disabled and your firewalls disabled so that you can get into those grants. Otherwise, you'll be working late, there won't be anybody there to support you, and you won't be able to get into what you need. So we'll include a checklist when we send out the information with the webinar that you can use to share with your technology department to help you be ready to submit those.
Oh, that'll be super helpful. That's great. Thank you. So if the team has verified all the technical things and, you know, make sure that those are all being covered, you know, what else can they do besides the technical things to make sure that that's a smooth process?
Right. So the technical things are really just the tip of the iceberg. They can prevent you from moving forward, but now you've still got all the stuff on the inside that you've got to do. So I think almost everyone who would sign up for a webinar like this has a basic understanding of the changes the feds have made that provide some additional flexibility in those federal funds. For some programs, that means it's going to be easier to spend your money. And for other programs, it means you're probably going to get less money. And you need to, more than ever, work together cross-departmentally to ensure that your students have the funds for what they need. So often in the districts I've worked with and for, those departments have gotten siloed because of the way we have submitted grants in the past. You sort of do your thing and you turn in your grants and that's that. With the new guidelines, we really have to talk to each other and make sure that our students are getting the services they need. And maybe even work cross-departmentally to make sure that happens. If you have a healthy district, you're probably thinking everybody already does that. So congratulations if you're them. But if you're not, don't shy away from that. No, there's lots of other districts in the same place, and you can reach out to those healthy districts and ask them for best practices, how they're doing that. You can also look to organizational behavior books and things like that to help you learn how to unsilo things and work together. We've always had student outcomes as our highest priority, but now in this new consolidated application format, we have to tie those more directly to existing goals, both at our district and state level. So before we could find a program we liked or a PD we wanted to implement and request it and kind of loosely tie it to outcomes, but now we're required to do that, you know, almost programmatically inside of the grant application. So as you do that, you're going to want to set SMART goals for the outcomes. And one of my pro tips for doing this is to draw on your special education department for their expertise. They live and breathe SMART goals. And I found them to be so helpful in reviewing the goals that I was writing and, you know, obtaining data and tying them to our district and state goals. So we'll include a checklist for things that you should look for when you're getting ready to put that together content-wise, but you want to have an exhaustive list of things you want to spend on. You know, in the past, we could kind of just tally it up till we hit the mark. Now you're going to want an exhaustive list because you want to tie it to your goals right away. And then we'll teach you some tips and tricks for gathering all the information you need to attach to the grant, but you'll want to do that early and make those requests early. Another thing a lot of people don't think about is using your vendors to help you. So if you need information on programs, I know we as Positive Learning, we're happy to provide you with the information you need that tells about our product, and most other vendors are the same. You just need to reach out and ask them. And then you want to have easy access to your district and state goals. Sometimes those documents are really unwieldy. Getting them into a PDF or a printed format where you can easily access them as you plan your grant application can be really helpful. And then at some point, you're going to want to plan a group discussion with the department heads over the federal funding grants to make sure that you're avoiding supplanting and that you are all evenly spread against the goals and that the kids are getting a good coverage of services.
Okay, well, it's quite the list. It's a lot to absorb. I guess if you could summarize and give us just, kind of a key takeaway or kind of the big picture, what would that be?
So it is a lot, but if you can view this as an opportunity to better serve students, that positive outlook that we're always telling our students to have, you can have that outlook that it's going to be positive and then motivate yourself to do better prep work. And that intentional prep work will let you better serve students. So view as it a chance to serve students. I think as educators, that's what really fuels our fire more than paperwork.
Great. Well, thanks. Appreciate that. So, we hear from a lot of districts that they're trying to avoid these last minute submissions, but, stuff happens and year after year, you end up doing that last minute scramble. But, what kinds of things have you seen to be successful that help you avoid that last minute scramble?
That is a great question. I think if we're honest here, all of us have at least once, if you've been in your position more than a year, done the scramble. If you haven't, I want you to call me because you should write a book and I want to know you. For the rest of us, it's the prep work and it's so critical and it's difficult to make time for that early in the year, but you can assemble most of these things months in advance. You know what programs you're going to buy and renew, you know what your district goals are, and you can also put good procedures in place to keep those things up to date. So for example, when you hire new people into your organization, have part of that new hire checklist be to make sure they have the right teal access and user roles, so you don't have to do that when it's time to submit the grant. Having said that, the practice of project management during this process and developing a submission timeline is important and critical. For some educators, this comes really naturally. Some of us are just really good at it, but for many of us, we're much better at classroom management, which is about individuals and meeting their needs as individuals rather than a great big project that has to be turned in at the end. So if that's you, if you're nodding your head, if you're really great at meeting the needs of the individual, but you struggle to get these great big projects in, I'm going to give you a way to think about it. Just break it into 3 parts. You can break it into deadlines, the technology support you're going to need, and then the actual content that you've got to assemble. So when you think about deadlines, a lot of times the reaction is to say, okay, what do I have to do next? And then you say, about how long will that take me? But you have to start at the end and set there and work backwards, which is a little counterintuitive. I used to set my deadline about 2 days before it had to be into the state because I felt bad asking anybody to turn it in earlier. But I can guarantee you the state does not set their deadline 2 days before they have to have it into the feds. They give themselves plenty of time to review it, and you should do the same. It will be a little painful if you're in an older organization, but set that deadline early enough that you have time to review it, and you'll end up with a better quality grant, and you'll be a healthy person in that chair, and that's better for everyone. Once you set that final deadline, walk backwards and think about what you have to have when, and then publicize that timeline. Many workplaces still work better with a printed chart somewhere, the water cooler, wherever people leave the cookies and the donuts in the morning. That's a good place to put that deadline chart. And you can also use digital tools like a calendar to keep people up to date on what the due dates are, and just start that as a norm. So the grant submission isn't about 3 days in June. it starts maybe at the beginning of May and works towards then. So that's the deadlines part. The second part is technology support. We talked a little bit about that technology checklist, but what I'm talking about here is if you're the kind of person who hears that you have to learn a new portal or a new program and you're just like, ugh, and you're going to avoid that as much as you can, that's okay to be like that. All of us have had different levels of experience with technology, but find someone who doesn't feel that way. There's someone in your office who's not afraid of it. So reach out to them. One helpful thing to do is to log in and note all of the things that you can't figure out. So maybe you can't get the fields to highlight, or you don't see where the document attachment is, or your browser doesn't work. Note those things, go get that person and say, can you show me how to do this? And do that well before the deadline. Usually these grant applications open 30 to 45 days ahead of time and you can get in there and poke around. So don't be afraid to do that. People are pretty patient with that now. New programs move fast and it's good to ask for help early. Tech support at the state level cannot help you that last week in June. Good luck. Just best of luck. So if you know you're going to need help, start early. So the last part is the content piece. And when we think about grant applications and the people who sit in the chairs to submit those, that's most often what comes to top of mind. And it may be the thing that you feel you have the best handle on. But there are lots of cool tools to help you organize that submission process that I didn't know about when I was in education. One of those tools is Trello. It's free. It's not affiliated with Positive Learning at all. It's just a free tool out there. We're going to send you a template you can use if you'd like to track all of your submissions. The neat thing about Trello is you can share the board with people and tell them what you need, set a due date, and they can attach everything to that card. And then you just pull it off and drop it in your grant application. You can communicate on the card. It saves you the emails and the attachments, and I can't find where that went. And you can also screenshot that Trello board, send it out to your friends with a reminder, deadline's next week, none of your things are submitted. Because I know more than once I've been in somebody else's department digging through file cabinets looking for data because they've gone home for the weekend and I've got a submission due on Monday. So that's a tool you can use. Don't be afraid of those. There's lots of other tools besides Trello, but consider using something like that. If you're still tracking in stacks of paper and email, there's better ways to manage that.
Wow, that's fantastic. So it sounded like we've got your three pillars covered. You talked about the deadlines, the technology support, and the content and organizing those. And I'll tell you that even after going through it, it still sounds like a really big job. And I just, I'm sure there's a lot of people that feel overwhelmed by that. Can you give us a suggestion of, how can what can I do to not get overwhelmed by this? What one thing should I try?
So I would say pick the thing you struggled with most last year and then implements on that. So if the most difficult thing last year was you just could not get the portal to work for you, focus on technology this year. If you were chasing people down trying to get content, try a tool like Trello. And if it's trying to do some of those other things, just pick the deadline sheet and just do that. And once that improves and people get used to it, then you can add something new next year. It's better to try one thing and improve a little bit than get overwhelmed and try nothing. So.
Okay. Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Well, thank you. That's very, very helpful. And I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. I feel like we've got a little bit of encouragement as to the kind of things that we should tackle. One thing we haven't really talked about is how to participate in the process. If you're a teacher or a building level admin, what advice would you give for as one grant cycle ends and a new one begins?
So the first thing is when you're far away from the district office, it's really easy to assume that it's too late to request this budget cycle for something your kids need. And it is true that it's a lot more difficult as the year comes to a close and you get closer to the end of the grant cycle, but it doesn't hurt to ask. If it's something your students really need, especially if it's closely tied to a state or federal goal that you're not meeting, you may as well ask. when you ask, tie the goal to the district goal or your school goal that's not being met, and use data. And again, reach out to those vendors. Ask them to help you quantify what using the product will do, and go with what you know, what you want to see improved, and what drew you to the particular product or PD that you want to use. It can be intimidating, but it can be done. So whether you're going to try to submit this year or you're going to wait till the next grant cycle, be clear about what you want, use data, tie it to a goal. And if you're watching this and that's something you want to know more about, it's really a webinar by itself, and we'd love to do that for you. So reach out to us and let us know. That might be one we can do later, help people out.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, and that's I think that's fantastic advice. One last question for you: if you did have a vendor like Positive Learning, help us understand what kind of specific things that Positive Learning could provide that might be useful to an educator.
Sure. So biggest thing is we can help tie it to your school and district goals. You probably know conceptually what you're trying to accomplish, but vendors like Positive Learning look at school and district plans all the time, and we know how to tie into those goals and write it in a way that's meaningful on a consolidated grant application, and we're happy to help you with that. And they can also provide you with other references who can talk to you about how they wrote it into their consolidated application. And that can be very helpful, especially if you're new.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Annalisa. I'm sure everybody watching found this very valuable. It's great to hear from you and get your advice on how we can approach these grants.
Good to talk to you too, Adam. Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Let's do it.
Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Bye.